Notice how in today's gospel reading, our Lord points out that there's nothing outside a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out are what defile. And he's basically referring to the law of the Jewish people, the dietary laws. And he's saying, well, just because you might happen to eat pork, you're not going to be defiled spiritually. So he's talking about spiritual defilement. Now, we would all agree, and our Lord would agree, that if you were to eat something that was poisonous or something that had, something bad on it, or even a virus on it, yes, we could get sick because of that. But it wouldn't defile your soul. It wouldn't mean that you're a bad person. So notice how it mentions in the gospel reading, thus Jesus declared all foods clean. So he was really referring to this, not the fact that you might eat poison or something detrimental to your physical well-being. And when it comes to things coming inside of us, it's not just through food that things enter into us. And it's worthwhile for us to reflect on this. So our Lord points out that what really defiles us is what comes from within. In other words, the sins that we commit. We choose to commit those sins. But those sins originate within us, within our desires, our pride, our selfishness. So sin originates within us, but there's many things that can come in from the outside that can contribute to us choosing to sin. In other words, many things come to us through our ears, the things that we hear, but also through our eyes. In fact, through all of our senses. So, for example, if somebody's going to be watching pornography or looking at things that's inappropriate, well, they're going to be inclined to want to sin. So they still choose to sin, they still have to make that choice, but this corruption, this pollution is coming in. It's going to stay in the person's imagination, their memory. A famous exorcist in the United States who's right now putting out a lot of videos, a lot of talks, Father Ripperger, and in one of his talks he points out that, part of the problem with pornography isn't just when the person is looking at pornography, but afterwards. In other words, the evil spirits make sure that those images remain in the person's imagination, their memory. So in other words, they can be recalled at any time. The evil spirits can bring these images to their memory at any time. So the person continues to be tempted. It's much harder for that person to overcome their inclinations to impurity. And it's not just in regards to pornography, but in our modern age, people have become desensitized to evil in general, including sexuality, but there's a lot of things on television that shouldn't be there, all kinds of violence, horrible things that are depicted on TV. I don't watch TV, so I don't see a whole lot of it, but I know it's there. And somebody recently sent me an article, and it was an article written by an exorcist. And sometimes exorcists, they're fortunate to have a person who's kind of a sensitive. They're able to detect the presence of evil. For example, when an exorcist will bless a home, they can detect that there are demons in this home, or there's a demon in this area of the home, or things like that. And what this exorcist pointed out that was very interesting is that in many homes, right in front of the TV, usually where the people sit to watch TV, there's a demon there. And the exorcist went on to say, well, in certain cases that's to be expected if people are looking at pornography or inappropriate things. But he said what they discovered was that also in, little old ladies, and these ladies, they've been living there for many years, they're not looking at that kind of stuff. But they might be looking at things like soap operas where there's all kinds of romance and adultery and affairs, and maybe it's not explicit, but it's implicit. And this is enough to cause the demons to be present and to influence people. Now, recall that prediction or that prophecy, I believe it was Elizabeth Ann Seton, St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. So she lived before electricity became prevalent, so basically before the time of electricity. And she said she saw a time in the future when every home will have a little black box, and through that black box, the devil will enter into every home. Was that the TV she was referring to, the radio, most likely the cell phone nowadays? And yes, evil spirits can enter, not just because you're looking at things that are clearly wrong, but even things that are inappropriate, but we've become desensitized to. And so it's important that we remind ourselves that we cannot accept this kind of stuff. We become desensitized. You know, there's so much swearing out there and people kind of think it's commonplace. So even swearing is bad. Father Gabriel Amorth, in one of his books, he talked about an individual who became possessed because of excessive swearing. Now, I'm not saying it's going to happen to everyone who swears, but the point is that when people swear, it's evil. And basically when a person swears, they're calling upon evil, they're opening themselves out to evil. So it's not surprising if the evil spirits have a greater influence on that person. So we shouldn't allow these things to be available on television. You know, government leaders, they censor all kinds of things because people are saying things that are not according to their agenda. So they censor them, but they allow all these things. And some would argue they allow it on purpose because they want to corrupt society. And I believe it was Pope Leo XIII, he wrote an encyclical on Freemasonry and what their plans are to kind of corrupt society, to get society to become more and more sinful. And in there, the Pope Leo XIII mentions some of their plans, and one of them is to get people to engage in immoral activity, to allow immoral activity to become commonplace, because once you corrupt the morals of people, they won't be coming to church. It's incompatible with their belief in God. So either they choose to be Catholics, to renounce these sinful practices, or they embrace them and they reject God. It's one or the other. You know, talking about government leaders, you know, in today's first reading, we have the Queen of Sheba coming to see King Solomon. So she's coming from a different nation, from a different country, to greet King Solomon, to find out more about him, and possibly to make connections. You know, countries often made ties. Sometimes they would engage in trade and things like that. But she had heard of his great wisdom. And she comes to see King Solomon. And it's very interesting that, you know, King Solomon, he was flourishing, his kingdom was flourishing, but she goes on to say that, you know, she sees how he's living and the attendance of his servants, their clothing, his valets, and basically, she goes on to say, so she's relating, happy are your wives, happy are these your servants who continually attend you and hear your wisdom. Blessed be the Lord. Okay, so in other words, everyone in Solomon's kingdom is well off. Even his servants are happy, not just because they hear his wisdom, but because they live well. He treats them well. He treats them with respect. He treats them with justice. And this is the kind of king we want. This is the kind of ruler we want. And we don't have this kind of ruler. And it's interesting, you know, I mentioned this a few days ago, or maybe a couple of weeks ago, I can't remember, but, you know, people, when it comes to voting, they actually vote for politicians who support abortion. And sometimes not just in their own country, but they will fund abortion in third world countries. In other words, these politicians are mass murderers. And that's the reality. Whether we like it or not, we have to accept that reality. They promote euthanasia. They promote, all kinds of immoral behavior. They allow it. And transgenderism and everything else. and euthanasia, assisted suicide. These people are mass murderers. They don't care about you. Sure, they care about your votes when it comes time to be elected. They'll make all kinds of promises to get your life, to get you to believe, rather, that your life will be better having them as your ruler, the ruler of your country or the ruler of your province or whatever it may be. But they don't really care about you. That should be obvious to everyone. So in other words, as Catholics, we cannot in good conscience vote for such a politician. If we do, we're also responsible. I don't want to be a murderer. I don't want to be responsible for the thousands of abortions that take place in Canada every single year and millions around the world. I would never do such a thing. And no Catholic should ever do such a thing. In other words, we need to vote for politicians who are more like King Solomon. Will they ever be like King Solomon? Well, obviously not. But the closer they are, the better. So what was King Solomon like? Well, he obeyed the laws of God. He implemented the laws of God. He taught the laws of God. He expected the people to obey the laws of God. And he promoted prayer. He was very prayerful himself. That's why he received the wisdom of God. Now, yes, later on he too will become corrupt, but he's an example for us of being faithful to God. As long as he was faithful, things went well. Once he starts being unfaithful to God, he too becomes corrupt and introduces all kinds of false worship and things like that. So, what are we allowing to enter into us? Through the things that we look at, through the things that we hear, even the music that some young people listen to, very inappropriate. Secondly, what kind of politicians do we want ruling over us? This is something really very serious for us to consider, and especially when it comes time for elections in the future. So we need to think about this.